This podcast is brought to you by the Albany Public Library main branch and the generosity of listeners like you.
What is a podcast?
God, Daddy, these people talk as much as you do. Razib Khan's Unsupervised Learning.
Thanks for listening to the ungated version of the Unsupervised Learning podcast. If you want to read some essays on some of these topics, please check out razib.substack.com. Again, that's razib.substack.com. Thank you.
You know that genetics plays a huge role in our health, and more people are using genetic testing to determine risk for diseases like cancer for themselves and their kids than ever before. So I want to tell you about Orchid. It's the only company that does whole genome testing for embryos, testing before your child is born. If you're doing IVF, this is a clear choice now because now you can reduce risk for thousands of single gene disorders, including heritable forms of autism, pediatric cancers, and birth defects. Check them out at orchidhealth.com. Hey, everybody. Thank you for listening to this podcast. By the way, I don't usually say this, but if you get a chance, please rate this podcast on Apple Podcasts and Spotify and stuff like that. That way, other people who like this sort of content will be able to listen to this, and more people will hear about awesome discoveries in science, like what we're going to talk about today with my guest, Cesar Fortes-Lima, who is a researcher at Uppsala University. Uppsala is in Sweden, as many of you know. And Adam of Bremen had some interesting things to say about Uppsala back in the 11th century. But that is neither here nor there. We're going to be talking about something different. We are going to be talking about the genetic legacy of the expansion of Bantu-speaking peoples in Africa. And that is not just a scientist, or that is not just a sentence that I invented right now. That is actually a paper in Nature that Cesar here is the first author on. And the last author is Karina Schlebusch, and she has co-authored and been involved in many, many papers on African genetics and ancient African DNA. I believe she is South African. So you're probably familiar with her. A lot of the other authors of the author list you probably will know of if you follow the ancient DNA and African genetics as well. But we're going to go through the paper. We're going to go through the results here. Some of you know I've written about the Bantus, recently on the Substack, and some of the information, some of the stuff I wrote was informed by the preprint version of this paper. So I'm excited to dig a little bit deeper with Cesar here, and I hope you're excited to join me. Cesar, okay, so we're going to talk about this paper just really quickly. Why did you particularly, take the lead on this? Like, is this an interest of yours, or was this a project that just seemed interesting when you were presented with it?
Thank you, Razib. Thank you for the invitation. It's a great honor to be here. That's a good question because we started this project a long time ago, but I initially joined to Schlebusch's lab at Uppsala University because I'm very interested on the genetic history of African populations. I previously collaborated on another project focused on Bantu-speaking people from Africa. It was published in Science, and in that collaboration, I collaborate with Luis Quintana Murci and Etienne Patin. And that paper was like the starting point for me in the study of African populations. I also have other studies about African descendants from South America and other regions, and I've been working quite a lot on this topic, and this is the main outcome of a European funded project that is called African Neo. And Karina Schlebusch is the leader of this project, and we have several collaborators in European and African institutions, and this study is part of a big effort from a team in Uppsala, but also is thanks to the collaboration with several researchers from Africa Europe.
Yeah, and I do want to say there are a significant number of co-authors, but this is not like one of the GWASs where the list of authors is longer than the paper itself. So, you know, it's you guys did a lot of the legwork here. Okay, so I mean, I'm gonna let you do the honors. Why are the Bantu-speaking peoples? Because you're focusing on a particular ethno-linguistic group. Why are they important within Africa?
Well, Bantu languages are very diverse in Africa. There are more than 550 languages currently in different regions in sub-equatorial Africa. And currently there are about 350 million people speaking this language, this linguistic family. So it's a very big language that is all over sub-Saharan Africa, and the expansion of this linguistic family started around 6,000 or 4,000 years ago in Western Africa, and changed from this expansion, changed completely the linguistic and genetic landscape in Africa, because cover most of the continent. So we have Bantu-speaking populations in Western, Eastern, and Southern Africa, and due to that big expansion, we can see different patterns of admixture and genetic continuity or replacement in some regions in Africa, and that is the important part of the study, to study one historical event that changed completely the continent, and to better understand the history of this important event in the continent that as I mentioned, changed the continent in Africa, but also changed the genetic diversity of African descendants in the diaspora, for example, in the US or in South America, or in Latin America.
Yeah, context there when you're talking about the diaspora, in particular Latin America. What I know for the U.S. is only a minority, probably, of the African ancestry in the U.S. is Bantu, but the further south you go in the New World, in the Americas, the greater the proportion. Stylized fact is that in Brazil, majority would probably be Bantu, probably be from Central African Republic area or Angola, the coast opposite. There's a little nuance in the latest genetic data. I think there's a little bit more West African than people were thinking, and we can detect these sorts of nuances with IBD, identity by descent, segment methods, and whatnot. I also want to say, obviously, the Bantu-speaking peoples and their demographic expansion are not the only linguistic expansion that we know of, ethno-linguistic expansion. So this is a specific instance of a general case. So you have the Austronesian expansion, obviously Indo-Europeans, an old one, Afro-Asiatic. In Australia, you have the Pima Nguyen, all of the Australian languages except for the ones in the northern part of the Northern Territory seem to be a very, very recently radiated language family. Now, interesting thing with Pima Nguyen is that it doesn't seem to have a strong autosomal genetic impact, by which I mean, the whole genome does not seem to be, reflecting this radiation. The Y chromosome might, okay, so it could be male mediated. I'm bringing this up because the Bantu is quite clearly the obvious. This is not the only paper. As you said, you've worked in this before in this area. There was another group that just came out with a paper, probably timed with yours, where I think they were looking at DNA in Mozambique and whatnot. And so there's a lot of work in this area. It looks like there was a lot of demographic replacement. I think it was a 2018, 2017 SMBE. The Pontus Skoglunds out of the Reich Lab presented that paper with ancient DNA from Africa down to Malawi. And those people do not look anything like the people that live in the area right now. So we are talking demographic replacement. I would say, in terms of your paper, Obviously, you brought together a lot of archaeology, cutting-edge genomics in terms of the data, and I think you did some modeling, explicit hypothesis testing, and so you took it to the next level in terms of scale and sophistication. Can you talk about that a little in terms of about the number of participants, your genotyping, your whole genome sequencing, and also you also got some. Well, I don't know if late Iron Age counts as ancient, but it's quite ancient. You got some, pre-modern DNA as well. So, as we say in America, you threw the kitchen sink at the problem here. And I think, I don't know how many more papers of this sort we really need about the Bantu-speaking peoples when it comes to genetics. I think you nailed most of the issues, if I say so myself. So can you get a little bit into that in terms of samples, your quantity of samples, the genotyping, whatnot?
Yeah, of course. So we genotype 1,763 participants from different regions in Africa, 14 countries in Africa. So it's very difficult to collect the DNA samples from participants from that many countries: Angola, Mozambique, the DRC, Zambia, South Africa, several countries, Tanzania, Kenya. So this is some of the countries. We collect mostly Bantu-speaking participants, over 1,500 participants that are only Bantu speakers. And that is for the mother DNA. We genotype those participants, the samples of those participants by using the Illumina H3 Africa array, one array specially designed for to capture the genetic diversity of African populations. And we also generate whole genome sequencing data from 12 late Iron Age individuals, 6 from Zambia and 6 from South Africa, from different sites. And yeah, it's unique, this study, because we include new data from both modern and Asian individuals, and we compare the data from modern and Asian individuals from different regions in the same study. So that is very, very, very special and remarkable in this study. And as I mentioned, we include participants from several countries, as many as possible. And you mentioned before that there is one recent study published in Nature Communication, focusing only on participants from Mozambique and Angola. This study is confirming some of our previous results also in Mozambique and Angola by using genotype data that was published in 2020 in Molecular Biology and Evolution. And also you mentioned the genetic ancestry or ancestral origin of African Brazilians, because for my PhD project I studied different African descendants from South America, including participants from South America, and I also found this connection between African descendants in Brazil and present-day populations in Angola. So I've been doing different studies before, and this project in particular is focusing on this big number of sample sizes for different regions in Africa, because we wanted to have the almost the full coverage of the distribution of Bantu-speaking populations today, to investigate, to further investigate how was the movement of these people across this big region of the continent.
Yeah, and the paper is open access. It's in Nature, obviously. Link will be in the show notes for you guys. Figure 1 kind of shows you the distribution of the various populations that are sampled, and that will implicitly show you where the Bantu languages are. In terms of geography, I just want to make it clear, if you guys have not read the Substack piece, which does make it clear, the hypothesis is that the Bantu-speaking languages come from the region where what are called Bantoid languages today, in northern Cameroon, in the grassfield regions. And so when you go to Nigeria, those are not Bantu-speaking languages. They are a different family, although perhaps they're related in some way. The Bantu-speaking peoples and languages seem to have spread, southward, eastward. And so when you look at East Africa, south of Ethiopia, south of Somalia, down the coast, all the way to, the Cape area where, traditionally the indigenous people were Khoi, not Bantu, almost all Bantu speaking, except for, a few people like the Hadza, Sandawi, speak like the Click languages. And then you have some Nilotic people that might or might not be intrusive. Probably there were earlier Cushitic people. In the forest in Congo, you have, the pygmy, rainforest hunter-gatherers, whatever you want to call them. Most of them speak Bantu languages now, exception is some of the northern ones. And then, of course, Angola, Zaire, Democratic Republic of Congo, whatever you want to call it. And then, the Congo Republic, and then, Cameroon, Gabon. So this whole 1/3 of Africa, south of Nigeria, south of the Sahel, south of the Horn of Africa and Sudan, is almost all Bantu speaking. There's a few exceptions, as I said, Khoisan regions in the south, etc. Obviously, European colonization in South Africa, Indians in Natal, whatever. But in general, this is the southern third of Africa. And, languages that some of you in the U.S. might have heard about, like Swahili, are basically Bantu-based. And these are relatively recent demographic expansions. And we know this from linguistics, and we know this from archaeology. And obviously, large parts of this region of Africa did not have an extensive literate tradition until quite recently. I would say the main exceptions are the East African coast and those areas. And whatnot, because of very, very old trade and cosmopolitan connections. But so archaeology is extremely important. Can you talk a little bit about archaeology, Cesar? I know that we're going to talk mostly about genetics, but how did archaeology inform this paper and this work?
Yeah, that's a good question, because we analyze human remains from different sites in Africa, late Iron Age sites in Zambia and South Africa, and of course the Asian remains were collected previously by archaeologists in those sites. So in the study we tested linguistic hypotheses first about the initial expansion, the late split and an early split, like in previous studies, and we confirm the results from those previous studies. The latest split is the hypothesis that is the most consistent hypothesis based on linguistic results and genetic results. In this study, for our analysis, we also compare linguistic, geographical, and genetic data by using different kind of correlations, by using Mantel test and other type of analysis to confirm those previous hypotheses. But also we went even further, because we investigate the whole expansion. We investigate to the expansion in the eastern, in the west south, and also at the at the end of the expansion in South Africa. So we investigate all the waves of the expansions in the eastern and in the western part, because we found different waves of expansion at both sides of the continent, but in the central part, we found crossroads where in countries like current day DRC and Zambia were like regions for different waves of the expansion. And that is something that archaeologists were discussing before. It's still an open debate, the Bantu expansion in the central part of the continent, because we don't really know whether countries in the middle were the region of the expansion for the western wave or the eastern wave. And apparently, based on our results, both waves of the expansion, they passed through those regions in the middle, and that is something that archaeologists are very, very interested, because in some countries like Zambia, you have archaeological evidence pointing to the different waves, but they weren't really sure about which one was the major wave, or whether there was only one wave and after replacement and so on. So we investigate that, and so we use spatial models to investigate migration rates and to investigate the different waves of the expansion, and we found the spread over a spread model it was the most consistent model for the expansion. So we unravel all the routes and we unravel how was the migration, these expansions from the initial homeland of Bantu speakers until the end of the expansion in South Africa.
Yeah. So let's dig a little bit into this. So one thing that is relevant here is Congo rainforest. Not super penetrable, probably for agriculturalists. And so one model that you tested for is northern, basically kind of like along the northern fringe of the woodlands. And then, obviously some would go south. So you have, a lot of the questions being tested are, Southwestern Bantu versus Eastern Bantu, how they're related, where they come from. And so, and we can imagine an early northern migration out of Cameroon through southern Central African Republic, northern Congo, this woodland savanna region, and then into Uganda, Great Lakes, Kenya. And this was a whole thing that's really, really evident in the archaeology, and it demographically and culturally transformed, Rift Valley, East Africa, the East African savanna, right? So that's where that comes from. There's another model, I guess, which focuses mostly on a southern route, which is going through Gabon, then Congo, and then kind of through the lower reaches of the Congo River, and then kind of like following these riverine routes into the interior, and eventually reaching an area like, say, Katanga, for example, in southern Congo. It starts opening up again. And then once it's opened up again, it's much easier to expand. And I just, for the listener out there, look, these people did not have, craftsman axes. They didn't have chainsaws. So you can imagine how difficult with, a lot of them probably didn't have shoes, like going through the rainforest, doing slash and burn agriculture. It's not a trivial task. But the combination of archaeology and now your genetic data would indicate that a route through, the Congo, as opposed to skirting through the north, is actually the origins of the Eastern Bantu, which is kind of important insofar as, these are iron workers that, bring the Iron Age to East Africa. They might not have brought iron themselves, maybe adopted it, synthesized it with other cultures, but they really, really transformed the region demographically and culturally over the last, I think they show up around 500 BC, maybe a little earlier, but around there. So definitely Iron Age by the time, Greece and Rome times, So back in ancient Egypt, I like to say this because people know about Egypt and Mesopotamia. Eastern Africa was not Bantu, right? The Old Kingdom, Eastern Africa was not Bantu. It was demographically very different, right?
Yeah, Eastern Africa is very different, and you have mostly Nilo-Saharan speakers and also Afroasiatic speakers in Eastern Africa. And one of the main problems or the main challenge in this study was to include a very big data set, but also to take into account admixture, because of course, for Bantu speakers, you have admixture between Bantu speakers and rainforest hunter-gatherers in the western part of Africa, but admixture between Bantu speakers and Nilo-Saharan speakers or Afroasiatic speakers in the eastern part of Africa. And in the south part of Africa, you have admixture between Bantu speakers and Khoisan speakers. So there are different components of admixture in different groups. So for several analyses, for several results, we had to do something very, very interesting and very difficult, is to remove that admixture from non-West Central African ancestry or non-Bantu related ancestry. So we did that by using phasing, masking, and imputation. So several steps before that. So we remove all that.
Wait, Cesar, we gotta. I know what you mean by that, but I gotta tell the listener what you mean by phasing, masking, and imputation. Okay, and you can elaborate if I make any errors. But basically, as you guys know, maybe you don't, but I think you should if you're listening to me. There are two copies of your genome, basically, these two segments. And, when he's phasing, what you're doing is you're figuring out how the genotypes are arranged physically or correlation, whatever, so that you can have the segments, so they're aligned to segments. And then in terms of masking, unmasking, you're assigning ancestry to these segments. So you have Khoisan segment, non-Khoisan segment, etc. He's looking for the Bantu segments because that's where the information about the BSP, Bantu-speaking peoples, is going to be. And then when it comes to imputation, so he said he had a genotype array. That means he's not covering the whole genome. So when you do imputation, what you want to do is fill in probably the things that are masked, fill it in with more Bantu, right? Markers that just by the correlation. And so you take the raw data, you have it in this one form that is a bit noisy, and it does not have the total signal or does not have a clear signal of what you want. Although I think there is still some signal in there. Anyway, but let's just set that aside. You pull out all the extraneous stuff through these methods, and you have a cleaned up genome that you've reprocessed, and then you do your analyses, and that's what's going on. And so go on.
Yeah, thank you for the explanation. It's an haplotype-based method or haplotype-based approach to really take into account only the Bantu-related ancestry in Bantu-speaking populations with different patterns of admixture. But if you remove all that admixture, you can really focus and you can really understand the genetic diversity of Bantu-speaking populations from Western, Eastern, and Southern Africa. So after doing all those complicated methods, after doing all that, we focus on the Bantu diversity, let's call it like that, or West Central African diversity in Bantu-speaking populations, and we found there is a decline of genetic diversity between Bantu speakers that is going from the highest value in the homeland region Bantu-speaking groups from the homeland until the eastern and southern region in Africa. So there is a progressive decline of genetic diversity that is following the pattern of the expansion. So that is one of the most interesting results in the study, because we confirm that decline by using different patterns or different parameters of genetic diversity, and also we confirm that with linguistic data. So there is indeed a decline in the diversity, in the genetic part, in the genetic diversity, and also the linguistic diversity. And then we check the admixture dates, because we have all the information after doing all the local ancestry inference approach to estimate the different haplotypes from different ancestries. So we estimate the timing of that mixture. So we estimate also when that mixture took place in Western, Eastern, and Southern Africa. And we detect also that there is a decline on that mixture dates. So the oldest dates of that mixture are between Bantu speakers and rainforest hunter-gatherers from Western Africa, and then you have early dates of admixture in the eastern and the southern part of Africa.
Yeah, let me elaborate here why the genetic diversity is so important, as Cesar mentioning. So some of you probably know of a paper from, I forget, I think maybe 2005, Sohini Ramachandran, lead author on it. And, the paper, there are some disputes that people would make about the significance of this paper now, but at the time it was a big deal. You showed the decay in genetic diversity from, I think they started Addis in Ethiopia all the way to the New World. And what they showed is, I think with heterozygosity, which is just, the differences on the two copies of the genotype, right? Whether they match or don't. It decreased as you go up further and further away from Africa. And what Sohini Ramachandran and I think Noah Rosenberg was the last author. Mm-hmm. What they were showing is out of Africa involved a reduction in genetic diversity, because every step you take, the sieve, the random genetic draft sieve, is pulling out more and more diversity. And so these are, the outcome of bottlenecks, whether they're strong bottlenecks or weak bottlenecks. Everybody outside of Africa who has no African ancestry shows evidence of a bottleneck around 60,000 years ago. A pretty strong bottleneck that's very, very evident in everyone's genes, whether you're an Australian Aboriginal or from Sweden. It's the same bottleneck, right? Well, within Africa, obviously, the same dynamic does apply when it comes to the Bantu expansion, because it could be, and it does seem like this is what it is, and we'll talk about that. A small founding population with a lot of genetic diversity is expanding southward and eastward, and maybe also reciprocally south, east and west. But in any case, they're expanding, and as they expand, they fission, and smaller, samplings from this original population. And so it becomes more and more relatively homogeneous as the wave of advance occurs. And that's what Cesar's detecting here. One thing I want to say, people often say Africans are the most genetically diverse population in the world. That is true. You look at a single African genome and, you see more diversity than in, the rest of the world. And as I just said, Eurasians and people of the New World and Australasia, they went through a bottleneck, probably, let's say 100 to 1,000 individuals, effective population calculations are always weird, especially if we don't have ancient DNA from that period. But, whatever, it's low. They went through that bottleneck, right? And so that bottleneck removed, I think, about like 10% of the genetic diversity. I'm thinking back to like the 1,000 genomes and Simon's genome data set. Okay, so remove that diversity, and those of us who are non-African in ancestry didn't get it back. Well, within Africa, that diversity is maintained, right? So when you look at an individual genome, quite diverse. The Khoisan people, the Sam Bushmen, those people have the most within Africa. But when you're talking about genetic diversity between populations, when you look at the Bantu-speaking areas of Africa, they're not actually that distinct. So the average Kenyan is extremely genetically diverse, just like the average person from Gabon is extremely genetically diverse. They have more genetic diversity than non-Africans, obviously. But when you're comparing their genes in a pairwise fashion, the genetic diversity from Bantu nation to Bantu nation is actually in the same order of magnitude as European nations. And why is this? Well, Cesar is telling us why. It's because relatively recent expansion from a founding population, these are not actually very differentiated populations. Now, they would be very differentiated populations if there was a lot of admixture, but there's not.
Well, I want to comment on that because, of course, if you compare Swahili speakers from Kenya, different populations from Kenya, because they live in a country that is more or less in a small region, let's say Uganda. So of course, they live geographically close, so they don't have too much genetic diversity between them. But when you're comparing populations that are very geographically distant, like Bantu speakers from Cameroon, and you compare them with Bantu speakers from South Africa, the distance between them is huge. So also the genetic diversity between them is also huge, especially when you're taking into account admixture. And if you don't take into account admixture, you're going to have Bantu speakers with admixture with reinforced hunter-gatherers and others with admixture with Khoisan speakers. So the genetic difference between them is going to be even bigger if you don't take into account admixture. So in African populations, indeed, you have a lot of genetic diversity, and in particular between African populations that are geographically distant, and also between African populations with a lot of admixture, you're going to have a lot of genetic diversity. So it's a simplification to comment like. To comment like that, because as you mentioned, in European populations, they pass through a huge bottleneck due to the out of Africa and because they went to regions with very difficult conditions during the glacial period, but in Africa they expand in a different direction, and they went to regions with good environmental conditions, and they were very successful in this expansion because in some regions it's very difficult to find local populations. For example, in Mozambique, it's very difficult to find rainforest hunter-gatherers or hunter-gatherers in Mozambique. You don't have local populations because the Bantu speakers replace the local populations, and in other regions they have admixture and so on. So there is a lot of complexity in African populations, and that's my point. And these populations, the most diverse populations, is very shocking, but they're very underrepresented in genomic research. For that, this study is going to contribute to try to balance the underrepresentation of non-European groups in genomic research, because as we know, most of the studies are focusing on populations from Europe in studies of modern DNA and also in studies of Asian DNA. So this study is going to contribute to break this imbalance.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, step out of this conversation real quickly, and I do have to say, big kudos to the UK Biobank and England for releasing 500,000 genomes or whatnot, whole genomes. They are making a huge contribution to this project of increasing genetic diversity, because even though obviously the UK is mostly overwhelmingly a white European nation of white British people, when you have 500,000 genomes, you're releasing a lot of people of African and Asian descent as well. So kudos to the UK. Really respect them for that. And, they got some issues going on in their country. I don't want to get into the details, but, when it comes to genomics, they're still, standing tall and doing great deeds. So I want to say that right now as we're recording. They've been, past week, people have been writing stories about it. It's a real big deal. And so thank you for that, UK. So in terms of the Bantu speakers, and you were saying, this local admixture thing is fascinating because, it's hard sometimes to figure out your priors for that. So, we know with Indo-Europeans, in Northern Europe, the local admixture is like probably, depending on how you estimate what the source population is, like 40% or 60%, whether you want to take pure Yamnaya versus corded ware, whatever. Southern Europe, it's local admixture is higher. You go to the Indian subcontinent, depending on which population you look at and how you want to measure it, it's like 70 to 95% local admixture. In Iran, it's probably like 60, 70% local admixture. So there's a lot of local admixture everywhere. With some of these expansions. And as I said, in Australia, it looks mostly like it's, kind of like cultural diffusion, cultural expansion, maybe paternal lineage mediated. I think with the Austronesians, the local admixture is lower, like 25%, whatever, depending on where you go. Obviously with the Polynesians, it's like 25, 35% mostly Melanesian. And then, in Indonesia itself, like places like Java, it looks like majority of the Javanese ancestry is from the earlier peoples during the Paleolithic, and then also the Austroasiatic languages that were probably in that region before. Okay, I'm telling you guys this because in Africa, in the Bantu regions, you can tell me, Cesar, it doesn't look like in a lot of areas there's very much local admixture at all.
Yeah, you have admixture with different groups. In Kenya, you have between Bantu speakers and Nilo-Saharan speakers and also Afroasiatic speakers. And in Tanzania, you have hunter-gatherers like Texas and Sandawe. So those are local groups, and some of them, they have admixture with Bantu speakers as well. So
let's give a proportion.
Yeah, so you have low proportions for that admixture with hunter-gatherers, like Texas and Sandawe in Tanzania. We include also in this study Bantu speakers from Tanzania, from different regions in Tanzania, and also from the island of Zanzibar. And indeed the proportions are low. Let's say between 4 to 10%. And for Kenya, you have a very complex scenario with admixture with the Nilo-Saharan speakers and the Afroasiatic speakers, because for different populations you have completely different values in the north part of Kenya and also in the south part of Kenya, as well as east and west, because of course different populations they have more admixture or less, depending on the geographical distribution.
Well, talk about you mentioned this earlier, but we didn't explore it in detail. Spread over versus continuity, and like what that means. My understanding is continuity is basically, continuity is kind of like an out of Africa type model in some ways, the older ones, where you start with the base and it expands outward, and then kind of the tree can be overlaid on the map because it just crystallizes outward and there's no, reciprocal gene flow, no reflux and all these things. Turns out that's probably wrong in terms of the out of Africa, but that's a separate discussion. You tested these options explicitly in terms of a hypothesis testing way, and what did you find?
Yeah, that's a good question, because we found the spread over spread model. It was very supported by the different tests that we use. We confirmed that also by using simulations. And yeah, so in the different regions in Equatorial Africa, there was a spread over a spread. In particular, in the western part, we already saw that in a previous study in Congo that it was published in Science Advances 2 years ago. In that study, we used mostly archaeological data and part of the genetic data from that region. But in this big study, we include way more populations than in the previous one, and the spread over a spread is the best model. In particular, in regions like in Zambia, because in Zambia you have the different waves of the expansion, as I mentioned before, and when we compare Asian samples from Zambia with modern populations from Zambia, we found the Asian samples they share different patterns of ancestry with different populations, not only in Zambia, but also with populations from the western part of the DRC and populations from Eastern Africa, like in Tanzania. However, in some regions, in some particular regions, like in South Africa, the end of the expansion, the latest populations went to South Africa because it's the most distant region. So in that region, we actually found a genetic continuity between the 6 Asian samples from South Africa, from Eastern South Africa, and Eastern South African Bantu speakers population. So it was very interesting to see the model spread over the spread in most of the expansion in Africa, but only in South Africa we found at least support for genetic continuity, at least in that region. So
Yeah,
it's
so I mean,
complex.
There's some nuance and subtlety. It's not like a simpler spread over spread. This model, just curious, like, what are the archaeologists and the linguists, like, what were their priors? I mean, you obviously have the genetic data, like looking at the patterns of relatedness, and that gives you, were there any contradictions or were they supportive?
Yeah, that's a good question, because in linguistic data you have a different picture of the history, because you have the most recent picture, because linguistic data is going to give you information about the last expansion or the last wave. So it's more difficult to investigate a model of spread over a spread with linguistic data. So because it's more difficult to have linguistic data from populations that they were living 700 years ago or 1,000 years ago. So with Asian samples, we can compare the picture of genetic diversity today and the picture of Asian genetic diversity in the past. So we have an advantage on that, but I'm not going to say that we have a better information. I think we have complementary information to add to linguistic research. And I think we can complement both genetic results and linguistic results. And of course, most of the linguistic hypotheses are based on linguistic continuity, because they obviously have the most recent picture. With archaeological data, you can see evidence of a spread over a spread. As I mentioned, we showed that in the study we did with archaeologists from Ghent University. We compare we compare archaeological data of different pottery from Western Africa, and we saw a gap between pottery styles from one period and pottery styles of different periods. So it's possible to see patterns of replacement and spread over spread with archaeological information. And now with genetic information, we can confirm this pattern of spread over spread that we saw in Western Africa in this previous study, but we can confirm that for the whole expansion, the whole Bantu-speaking, the whole expansion of Bantu-speaking people until the end of the expansion in South Africa. And as I mentioned, in South Africa, we have a more complex picture as well.
Well, as you said, you've been working on this for a while. I mean, there's the whole broader project, the topicality. What has surprised you the most as you've been, kind of discovering all this stuff?
So that's a good question. I personally found more interesting the results for admixture dating, because to have this clear picture of decline for the timing of the admixture between populations that are very different and they're very geographically different, and they have patterns with completely different sources, hunter-gatherers, Nilo-Saharan speakers, Afro-Asiatic speakers, Khoisan speakers. So you have very different sources, and the timing of that mixture is really a nice picture of decline, because we confirm that with linear regression, and indeed there is a decline of that mixture. So you can see clearly when people move, when they have admixture, which local population interact with the Bantu migrants, and also when that mixture took place. So all that information is for me very interesting, and to put that together in just one plot, and to see this progressive decline of that mixture over generations from different groups, with that mixture with other different groups. At least I really like that result, and I really like that figure is figure 2 in the manuscript. But we have also other really nice figures about the genetic landscape in Africa today, with a very comprehensive data set of modern and Asian populations. And I recommend people to have a look at the supplementary material, because we have several figures to really understand the genetic diversity today in Africa and also in the past.
Well, I mean, so where are you going into the future then? What are you interested in, for your next project? Because, now this is done, onward.
Yeah, that's a good question. So the next project is to investigate signals of selection in those populations, because of course we know there is admixture, and some populations they move from endemic regions to malaria and other diseases to other regions that are not endemic to the same diseases, or they have different patterns or different prevalence for different diseases, and also they have different vectors, and also they have admixture with populations that are not in endemic regions, so the selection is different. So you include admixture in this complex process. So it's going to be very interesting to investigate signals of selection in those populations in the context of admixture, and also to investigate human health, taking into account human history.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that I'll be curious about is, obviously immunological stuff that always happens, and with malaria, the spread of agriculture, there's obviously a mode of production, economic historical sense, shift with the arrival of the Bantus. And I think one of the stylized facts is in these Nilo-Saharan populations that, and presumably the Cushitic populations that were there, much more numerous earlier, were engaging in, pastoralism with cattle. And there are lactase persistence alleles in these populations that are unique to them. And that is different than from the Bantu farmers who do not have them, right? That's the easiest one to think of. But, when you have a farming lifestyle, that's quite different than a pastoralist lifestyle. And so I do wonder what selection pressures are going to be affecting them. They did move into new landscapes, although it seems like their agricultural toolkit that they had in East Africa was viable up to, into Eastern South Africa. Just, once you get into certain arid zones, it starts to get a little difficult, and then you got to get more and more pastoralist. And the Bantus did adopt pastoralism as they move southward, right? So they're not like one. I mean, the languages are obviously all similar, but they look very different depending on where you are. Quote unquote Hutus in Rwanda probably not going to have that much cattle, but in South Africa, the Bantu have plenty of cattle. The Xhosa have, they're cattle people. So, they are adaptable culturally, and, cultural adaptations have an impact on genetic adaptations downstream.
Yeah. Currently, we aim to investigate different patterns of adaptation and selection in populations with different lifestyles, and also populations living in different regions that are endemic to different diseases. Because of course the adaptation is based on the cultural patterns, but also the environment is playing a role in the history of the populations for selection. So we want to investigate more about human health indeed, and also we want to do that research with an anthropological point of view and genetic point of view. Taking into account the different lifestyles of the populations. We did already a study in the Sahel belt to investigate selection signals in populations that have admixture with different groups, Nilo-Saharan, Afroasiatic, Bantu speakers, and also in the Sahel belt you have also the non-African component from Middle Eastern and European groups. So we already did a study, and we want to continue that in Bantu speakers.
Yeah. Just to reiterate, Cesar saying here, when you do evolutionary genetics, obviously you have to create the phylogenetic tree. You got to check the lineage and all that. A lot of this is due to like stochastic sampling, random genetic drift. And then obviously the allele frequencies are also changed by the drive to adaptation, and some of those are quite interesting because instead of just tell you where people have been and where they migrated, it tells you what they experienced. And so I think that's what he's getting at here. They underwent major changes in terms of their lifestyle over thousands of years, and they spread over a large part of the continent with different climates, different ecologies, and they engage in different lifestyles, so, I mean, who knows what he's going to find out. So it was great talking to you, man. Really excited, Dr. Fortes-Lima, for your work in the future. I think it's going to be good. It's really great that we're like figuring out what's going on in Africa, because obviously, I'm interested in human evolution, and it's pretty much like half or more of human evolution is in that continent, and
Thank you, Razib, for this interview and to put the focus on populations that are really underrepresented in genomic research, in particular Asian samples from Africa are really not included in several studies, and we hope that this study is going to contribute to increase the representation of non-African groups in genomic research, and I'm very very happy to talk about that.
Yeah, my pleasure, man. And as you said, it's in the supplemental. You can look at data and code availability. I know people out there are curious about that, so check that out. This is exciting stuff. And
that we include in interactive plots also in GitHub for people to further explore the
nice. Nice. This is Science in 2023, almost 2024 as I'm recording it. Super exciting. I'm super excited to talk to you, Cesar. And thank you for your time, man.
Thank you so much.
Whole genome sequencing is used for adults and children every day to assess risk for thousands of diseases. ORCID, a genetics company led by scientists from Stanford, is able to do this for IVF embryos. Now, instead of waiting for a diagnosis, parents can assess if their embryos have genetic variants known to cause severe conditions before their child's even born. No other tests can detect these issues so thoroughly or so early. So check them out at orchidhealth.com.
This podcast for kids